James Franklin says he wants whiteout energy. This Penn State-Illinois game should absolutely be a whiteout.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Things change, and now Illinois should absolutely be the whiteout game for Penn State. Some freshmen emerged big time in that Kent State game, and there were some more injuries that piled up after that same game. We'll talk about the impact on this Penn State football team in an all-new Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. And let me know down in the comments section. Of course, I'd really appreciate a like, but more importantly, I really would appreciate your thoughts and feedback about the Kent State game, and if Illinois should in fact be the new whiteout for Penn State. And I'm going to go with absolutely. Yes, this game should be the de facto whiteout for Penn State. And here's why. It opens up as an roughly 17.5 point favorite, right? 18 in some places. I'm not looking past Illinois. Penn State's the better team. Don't get me wrong, but you can't just overlook a Brett Bielema team that has outcoached Penn State in the past, and this is a team that is more talented, while I do think they have some question marks, which I will get to in a moment. It's complicated in itself. The whiteout game has the controversy around it because of what Fox is doing with Big Noon Kickoff and where they select games, and Penn State wants a primetime game because the whiteout atmosphere obviously looks much better at night than it does when the clock strikes noon at the top of the hour. This fits what Penn State wants to do. 7:30 kickoff, a ranked team. Illinois is now top 20. This is a completely different conversation. If Illinois is 2-2, had lost to Nebraska, if they were outside the top 25, I don't know that this game makes sense in terms of the caliber of opponent, but that's what Penn State's going for, and it's ironic, isn't it? Because in the offseason, the Penn State fans were a little cautious, and myself included, just saying, hey, Illinois should be the whiteout game because it's conveniently in the earlier part of the schedule. But now this is a top 25 team. This is a team that has my respect for the way that they played against Nebraska. They beat a top 25 Kansas team on the road. Nobody originally wanted Illinois, but now it fits because you have that caliber of opponent mixed in with prime time, in addition to the fact that, yes, the weather is going to be better. It's going to be tolerable. It's going to be pleasant. Knock on wood, because I hope I do not jinx a rainstorm in there somewhere. But you get my point, is Penn State wants to check all these boxes off. A, is it an interesting opponent? Yes. Who remembers the 9 overtime game? So there's a little bit of a revenge factor here too, and now Illinois is currently in the top 25, top 20 even. It's in prime time. Nobody wants a noon whiteout game. 3:30 is the compromise, but that's in mid-November when it does get darker earlier. And again, the weather. Nobody wants cold and rainy late in the fall, because that's not gonna make for a great atmosphere. What makes for a great atmosphere is prime football weather, prime time, and a prime opponent. And that's what you have now. My thoughts on Illinois specifically: quarterback plays better. Luke Altmaier is better this season and is a legitimate talent. They have a stable of running backs. Talking to Sonny from Locked On Illini, and I hope that you saw that early preview of Penn State versus Illinois before even the Nebraska game itself, but he said they have 3, even 4 capable running backs in a Brett Bielema offense, and it's an offense that can do a lot of things. They're primarily going to go spread, but if they need to go to that classic ground and pound look with multiple offensive linemen, extra offensive linemen, as they did against Nebraska to win that game, that is what Brett Bielema can do for you as a coach. So this is a more talented offense with obviously a similar head coach, the consistency that you have in Brett Bielema as a well-coached team, regardless of what Illinois has in terms of its overall roster. And then you have this really good wide receiver duo where Penn State is going to get tested on the outside with its cornerbacks. A.J. Harris didn't start against Kent State. I don't know what that's all about. Even though Penn State has the depth at cornerback, they still haven't really been tested between West Virginia, Bowling Green, and Kent State. And it didn't look good against Bowling Green with the secondary play. However, Penn State is an 18-point favorite, roughly. 17.5, 18-point favorite for a reason. Illinois' defense is the question mark. They lost Jerzon Newton and Randolph, the two anchors in the middle of their defensive line from a season ago. And that's where the offensive line versus defensive line matchup is going to be a big deal because Penn State's offensive line, in my opinion, still has some question marks. But I like what Illinois has in the secondary. Miles Scott, extremely effective safety, one of their best playmakers overall. Pro Football Focus rates him very highly. Illinois has good spots on its defense, but Penn State's offense is clearly not the same, and it's obviously because of the offensive coordinator change that they made with Andy Kotelnicki, and Kotelnicki knows this Illinois team well. Kansas played Illinois last year, and look at the difference between what a Kotelnicki Kansas offense can do, putting up points after points and just sustaining drives and everything else. Really, Illinois had little to no answer in that game for a Kansas offense a year ago. Then this year they hold them to 17 points in Kansas. The Andy Kotelnicki effect right in front of you. Now this begs the question, okay, so I'm all in on Penn State versus Illinois being the whiteout, even though it's not going to change. You're going to have the fans. James Franklin encourages whiteout energy for Penn State versus Illinois because they can't go back on the game theme. So Washington. Why is everybody criticizing Washington? James Franklin, I want to point to him because he said this in the past about NIL, but I think this applies to the same situation here. The market is the market. The customer, the fan, is always correct. The fan is going to want what it wants. Originally in the offseason, Illinois did not seem to be that caliber of opponent, played its way into it. Okay, more ideal matchup. It's earlier in the season, so you can get better weather, and it's at night. Everybody can agree on all three of these categories when it comes to the ideal whiteout. But the fan wants what the fan wants. It's Ohio State. Everybody wants Ohio State in this situation. But because everybody's assuming that Fox is going to pick up that Penn State-Ohio State game, even though it isn't official, maybe it is, but I don't think it's official just yet, but the inclination is that Penn State did not want to rely on Fox, the network, to dictate the terms of the whiteout. So Penn State was in a situation where they were doomed if they did and doomed if they didn't. One way or another. No good deed shall go unpunished. I'm sure people have heard that phrase before. So Penn State, I don't blame them for making the decision to go and select Washington. I don't blame Kraft for making that decision. That's a new Big Ten team from the former Pac-12. It wasn't too late into the season. Weather, I guess, might be, it's not ideal. You don't know, but I guess it would be a little more tolerable than even later into the season. It's a 3:30 game as opposed to a true night game, so the weather wouldn't be awful and it would turn from daylight to dusk, right? NCAA runner-up. They were just in the national championship. But the fans, some fans, not everybody, expressed concern about that. Washington is obviously not the same team that it was a season ago. I will not sleep on this Washington team. I think they have tons of talent. I think they are overloaded with talent. Jed Fish is a really good coach. Will Rogers is a capable quarterback, but they have not figured out the chemistry, and that is why people are saying, oh, see, Washington's not going to be good. Penn State is going to have an interesting battle when that game rolls around because I think Washington and the Huskies will be clicking by that time. It would be better to face them earlier in the season than later, and Penn State, unfortunately, is facing them later in the season. But that's what I think about Washington, and I can reason with the fans that had their concerns, their doubts about the Huskies, because it didn't seem like that typical, like the best option for the whiteout. We know what the best option was. Penn State has to go with the best available option. The best option is Ohio State. Fox won't let Penn State do that because nobody is willing to compromise on the noon kickoff time for the whiteout. So here we are again. It needs to be Illinois as the de facto whiteout because the official game theme is still going to be set for Washington. But I do not blame James Franklin and now the assistant coaches getting involved in beating the drum to have whiteout energy at Penn State versus Illinois. And now we know some freshman players could factor into that game significantly. There were 5 that stood out from the Kent State game in particular, and we're going to discuss what their performances met and what they will contribute down the stretch of the season coming up next here on the show. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200. That is right, $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet on FanDuel. Again, that's FanDuel. FanDuel.com is where you go. And if you look over at FanDuel.com, you can see the lines for Penn State versus Illinois, that primetime matchup. Penn State opens as a 17.5-point favorite. The total is set at 47.5. If you like those lines, you can bet them right now over at FanDuel.com. Again, that's FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. I hope everyone's ready for the emergence of these 5 freshmen, and this is huge for Penn State because it is a long season. It's 12-plus games. If Penn State can do this right, you lose key players. Key doesn't even begin to describe the impact of KJ Winston not being available. Saw some other injuries pile up in that Kent State game, which we will talk about in the final segment, specifically what the impact of those are. But to cut right to the chase, tight end Luke Reynolds is the first of those 5 freshmen that stood out in Saturday's game. Went out in the athleticism, the pure athleticism. So now you understand why he was rated as a 5-star, according to 24/7. Reynolds is the next true superstar tight end for Penn State. You had Mike Gesicki. Then you go to Pat Freiermuth, and then you see this, this line of Brenton Strange, Theo Johnson, now Tyler Warren truly being that complete all-around. And James Franklin said it again. He is the most complete. He is the best tight end in the country. Tyler Warren certainly made a case for it with what he was able to do on Saturday. Blocking ability, throwing the football, for crying out loud. He had a touchdown pass in the game. So I guess that's truly what it means to be the most complete tight end. And Reynolds flashed that kind of potential. Maybe he won't be throwing touchdown passes. Maybe he will, because like Tyler Warren, he played quarterback a little bit in high school as well. So there is that throwing capability. But Reynolds is going to be sought after more because of his receiving ability. All kidding aside, Reynolds, the ability to go up as an 18, 19-year-old true freshman who enrolled early, and that's helped him quite a bit to get to this point. But to go out of the air, that's a ball that would normally sail from Prabula. It wasn't the most accurate throw, and Luke Reynolds bailed him out. Climbed the ladder, went up and got it, and came down with it. That is a veteran type of play. That's the play that you would expect Tyler Warren to make in addition to that sideline one-handed catch. And Luke Reynolds did that. The pure athleticism. He's progressively getting better as a blocker. He's improving as a blocker. He's showing physicality. He is not afraid, and he's able to take on opposing players that are bigger than him, comparable in size or bigger than him. He is able to keep up with the pace, the intensity of college football. And why I point that out so specifically is because it is difficult to play tight end early in college football. You need time to develop. James Franklin has pointed this out. I've tried to echo this on other episodes, is the fact that tight end, you are going to be undersized. When you're a tight end, you are responsible for blocking defensive ends that are Denai Dennis Sutton types, where you are 6'6", 260 pounds. The average size, right, is going to be 6 foot, something in the range of 6'3", 6'4", 250. But when you're a high school tight end at about 210, 220, and you're blocking comparable defensive ends at that size, and then you got to block across from you when you're on scout team, a Denai Dennis Sutton, who is 260 pounds, or an opposing player on an opposing team. That is a little daunting, and Luke Reynolds has been up to the challenge, and that's why Penn State trusts him so much. I'll stay with offense before I go to defense. Tyzer Denmark is going to be in the rotation sooner rather than later. There was a reason he was generating buzz at preseason camp. There is a reason that Penn State had recruited him so heavily, even when he was committed to Oregon and then ultimately flipped to Penn State. Denmark gets separation on his routes. Actually, what was really surprising about his game was his ability as a blocker, because Denmark isn't the biggest wide receiver. 5'11", right, a little undersized, but he's more comparable to the Jahan Dotson build as opposed to a big, tall, 6'4" Jawan Johnson type, right? Tyser Denmark is more of your typical speedy, quick, shifty receiver, and he did really well blocking when he was out there. But it's the separation, it's him being crisp and clean with his routes, and I think he, down the stretch of the season, I don't know that he'll be a focal point in the offense, but he will contribute, and he will contribute more than people are expecting at this point in time. They just need to be able to trust him on the football field, and you could see that. Sure hands, route running is the best attribute to this point in time. Showed that he can hold his own as a blocker, which is really going to be key, because you don't want to tip your hand. Oh, Denmark's on the field, we're definitely passing it. No, he can go out and lay a block if he needs to. That was the most impressive part of it. Denmark will be, I think, ultimately that 5th or 6th wide receiver that cycles in with this group that is primarily been Trey Wallace and Amari Evans. Another big day for Amari Evans. But then you saw Liam Clifford and Julian Fleming get back to the mix. Caden Saunders probably still nursing those bumps and bruises since we haven't seen him outside of returning punts. But Penn State, James Franklin continue to speak highly of him. Denmark will be that 6th guy and won't just be an additional player on the depth. He can actually make plays if he's called upon here. Now let's go to the defensive side, because these 3 players are needed big time with all of the injuries piling up, which again, I will discuss in the final segment. Max Granville, I think overall impressed me the most, because I'm going to go back to the point that I made about Luke Reynolds and weight and getting up to speed with college football, keeping up with the intensity. Max Granville currently weighs 229 pounds. Very undersized. More to that, he was supposed to be a high school senior, so it's no wonder he's underdeveloped, because he's ahead of schedule. He's 1 year ahead of his schedule, his timeline, playing for Penn State. And he got in fairly early. Granville is, by all accounts, taking a redshirt season here. He has to be. But Penn State clearly trusts him, believes in him, and sees his potential for him to go out there that early in his career when he should be a high school senior. And Granville did very well against offensive linemen that are not the biggest in the world, but clearly bigger, more physical than him at this point in time, when he should be a high school senior, but he's a freshman in college. And he did well. On the few plays where he was rushing the passer, he got push. He got leverage. He made the quarterback speed up his clock and get rid of the football. Granville absolutely showed out in limited capacity, but Penn State got him action early, which is really surprising, and he did not disappoint. I do want to go to Dejon Lane next, because he is the priority. He is going to have lots of responsibility moving forward. Granville, it's nice to see his progression, but Dejon Lane is going to be circled here for the remainder of the season on the depth chart, with KJ Winston's undisclosed injury, undisclosed timeline for his return, right? People are telling me, hey, on X, in my comments, he's actually out for the season. At the end of the day, we don't know. What we do know is it's a long-term injury, and he will miss a good portion of the season. Dejon Lane allows Penn State to stay committed to the 4-2-5, which they clearly were against Kent State. They had to the 4-3 rotating in there, but then injuries to linebacker, already limited depth. Dejon Lane becomes more important just because of overall availability, and Penn State wants to run the 4-2-5. They want to keep Abdul Carter at defensive end. They want 2 linebackers and 5 defensive backs. Dejon Lane, as a true freshman, somebody who was on campus May, June, did not enroll early, is where he is right now. Developing very well at this stage of his career. They trust him a lot. He showed veteran understanding of the game. Talent aside, as a freshman, you need to be able to understand the game of football. And that's what Dejon Lane showed above all else. Good instincts, knowing what to do, where to be, being patient. Those are the kinds of things that do not show up in freshman first-year players. For Dejan Lane, it does, and he becomes more important because it allows Penn State to let Jalen Reed be at his best, let Zach Wheatley be at his best, and not have them overcompensate and play out of position just so that the defense can exist, just so that it can be its best. It can remain as a better version of itself because KJ Winston is obviously the part of the best version of a Penn State defense. But it allows it to still be the better version of a Penn State defense with Dejan Lane out there as that third safety. And Penn State will rotate in Cam Miller as well. So kind of think of them as co-starters, but Dejan Lane allows them that flexibility with that third safety spot. And then Anthony Speca. Anthony Speca will prove to be important down the stretch as well if the linebacker depth continues to teeter like this. He showed excellent vision, physicality, speed, was just at times, whether it was a run play or the way that he just pursuing the gap and going and making a play, or at least putting his helmet into the pile. And that's what with the vision, being that true Penn State linebacker, trying to continue the tradition of linebacker U. Similar situation to Lane here, Speca. They might need him more than they originally thought, and he did not disappoint in the time against Kent State. And with all that being said, injuries continue to pile up for this Penn State team. Some of them that are going to sting in more ways than one, and we'll talk about the two key players that were lost and hopefully will not be lost for long on the other side of this break. And today's episode is also brought to you by Game Time. You got to download the Game Time app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. Game Time has a new feature, and it's called Game Time Picks. That makes getting tickets to your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste your time searching through thousands and thousands of tickets. And you can look on, I have Game Time pulled up in front of me. You go to Game Time right now, you can see tickets available for Penn State versus Illinois this upcoming Saturday. Take advantage of this super deal right now, which is upper sideline on Penn State's side, the eastern side of the stadium, where you can get 2 tickets for $86 a piece, all in with the fees included. If you're looking for the lowest price deal, you can get upper end zone in the north side of the stadium for $67 a piece. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. The two players that I'm referring to are running back Cam Wallace and linebacker Dom DeLuca. Left the game. Cam Wallace left later in the game. Dom DeLuca left early in the game. But going on the field after the game and seeing the team and everybody walking around, there's optimism for Dom DeLuca, but we won't know until we ask and gather questions. Is this short term? Is this long term? Is he okay? The Cam Wallace injury does not look good. Was helped to the sidelines by fellow Penn State teammates. There's a lot to unpack with both of these specific players and their availability moving forward. I'll start with the linebacker because I keep talking about linebacker depth, and it's a question in the overall linebacker talent. And everybody says, some Penn State fans, I shouldn't say everybody, some Penn State fans would argue that Abdul Carter should absolutely go back to linebacker. And the Dom DeLuca injury, hopefully it's not long term, does not bode well for this case. The linebacker group is teetering to this point. They cannot afford another injury. I do want to remind fans that it's nice to see Penn State beat up on Kent State, win 56-0, but it is Kent State. And Penn State, I think, is one linebacker injury away from being in a serious situation where maybe Abdul Carter does need to play a game at linebacker. Dejan Lane and Anthony Speca from the safety and linebacker position do help in this case because it allows Penn State to still do what they want to do with Tom Allen's defense. But Dom DeLuca, a veteran, he is a playmaker. He's a really good linebacker and understands the game of college football very well. You cannot afford to lose him. You cannot afford now. Tony Rojas and Kobe King, how many snaps can they play in a game? if somebody like Dom DeLuca is not available, Tyler Elsdon is playing above his expectations this season, which is good. But now you're down to 3 of the trusted linebackers. 4 of them, they like Tamir Robinson. They believe in Tamir Robinson. But your top 4 linebackers that Penn State would trust in a 2-minute situation, let's say 2 minutes at the end of the fourth quarter, tight ball game, defense is on the field. Tony Rojas, Kobe King are the first 2. Dom DeLuca, Tyler Elsdon are the second 2. It is not preferred to put Tamir Robinson in, even though they believe in his potential, and Tamir Robinson is on the outside looking in to being in that trusted category. But after that, Dakari Nelson got some playing time, mentioned Specca a lot. If Dom DeLuca is not available, it just gets it just gets dicier for the linebacker spot. The linebacker spot already had question marks about its depth, and now that's starting to show up here, and it's why originally I had Penn State at 10-2, because I didn't know how the depth chart would be able to go through a 12-game season, and now we're seeing the injury bug bite in places where Penn State really couldn't afforded that to happen to. So hopefully Dom DeLuca's again, just going on the field, the eye test, the initial instinct of, because Penn State is very close to the vest when it comes to explaining injuries. Dom DeLuca looked okay, but KJ Winston also looked okay in that viral video that was circulating on X, on Twitter. And so you don't know what judgment to make here. Dom DeLuca was held out of the game, did not return, but that was also Kent State. So just assume hope for the best, but we'll see about things moving forward. They just can't afford to lose him, is my point. And I'm not here to report one way or another just yet. We'll hear from James Franklin in his Monday press conference and then after practice in the middle of the week. The one that I do want to get to that does not look good at all and has serious implications is Cam Wallace. And why this one, hindsight is 20/20, but this one stings a lot more because of how it happened. I allude to the fact that hindsight is 20/20 because Cam Wallace shouldn't have been in the game. Bo Perbula shouldn't have been in the game. Ethan Grunkemeyer and Quentin Martin or Corey Smith. It was good to see Quentin Martin get in the game late, show what he was capable of, because I think he's one of the future stars at that running back position. Cam Wallace and Quentin Martin are the dynamic duo for next season after Nicholas Singleton and Katron Allen. Cam Wallace was your 3rd running back. Penn State showed that it was not afraid to play 3 running backs at times this season. And now that brings into question, and I get what they're trying to do, get some extra reps, some in-game reps for Wallace. But when you utilize him, when at any moment in time, if Singleton's unavailable or Allen's unavailable, Wallace is the next man up. They use him pretty frequently. He's not just a luxury depth piece. He is an actual contributor that in a moment's notice, he can be somebody that they need to rely on in offense, and it did not look good. That injury does not look good. Again, hope for the best, but you never know. Let's just hope that's the case for Cam Wallace, that it's not a long-term injury. But according to the eye test, it does not look good. And now Penn State has to make a decision. If Wallace is unavailable, does that mean Quentin Martin, who they originally planned to probably have this be his redshirt season, now you might have to play him over 4 games and accelerate his timeline when you didn't want to do that? All because of what? I understand the coaches are going to say we were trying to get him extra playing time. But I can't help but sit here and say that Bo Perbula was taking a lot of late hits in the ball game that he shouldn't have. I get what you're trying to do to allow them to run the offense and get some additional reps in game outside of practice. But Perbula and Cam Wallace as quarterback and running back, Perbula just happens to be healthy. Wallace, same thing can't be said. And now that has negative consequences in what you ultimately want to do, unless, again, Wallace is in a best case scenario, short-term injury, no long-term impact here, but you can't rely on luck in this instance, and it just wasn't necessary at the end of the day. So Wallace and Dom DeLuca, hopefully they're back sooner rather than later, but Penn State is, James Franklin's acknowledged it, that injuries are piling up early in the season. And they're getting close to that gauntlet of USC on the road, Wisconsin on the road back-to-back, Ohio State, Washington, and now Illinois is ranked. I like Penn State against Illinois, but you need as many available players as possible for a top 25 matchup against a well-coached team at the end of the day. But that'll do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. Again, I really would like to know your thoughts on all of these things. The whiteout debate, Washington, Fox, Ohio State, now Illinois as the whiteout energy game. The freshmen that emerged against Penn State, and then key injuries to key parts of the depth chart. I want to know your thoughts down in the comments section. Please leave a like on this episode, share it with friends and family. And if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest conversations around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And again, thanks so much for making Locked On Nittany Lions your first listen and watch every single day. For your second listen and watch, check out Locked On College Football, hosted by Spencer McLaughlin. Game recaps, game previews, all the latest news regarding college football is discussed on that show. And it's fitting because it's called Locked On College Football. It's available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.